Okay, good morning. Boker Tov, Shabbat Tov, everybody. Coming back. And we're starting V'Shah Tova Matzlachet, a new volume this morning, volume 19 of the Tzurba Rabbanan series. I remind you again, the books are available to purchase. I won't remind you that there are sponsorship opportunities because I think that drove people away. But no, a few of our regulars are away this week, but never mind. We are learning Hilchot Borer, the Hilchot of sorting. We've been discussing that for a couple of weeks. We saw, if you have the books, those online will not yet have the books, I apologize. But if you have the books, we'll start on page 23. And we've been discussing until now, Bora, the classical case with items of food, right? We saw the three cases, three conditions in which something would be considered derech achila rather than derech breira, i.e. separating ochel mitoch psolet. I remove the food from the waste, I take aside, sort that which I want as opposed to that which I do not want. We discussed last week at length what happens if I have two different types of foods. Is one considered ochel? Is one considered psolet? How does that work? But generally speaking, if I have food and waste, I'm able to separate the food from the waste and not the waste from the food, right? It has to be done with my hand rather than a specialized clear, specialized utensil. And we discussed those definitions. And it has to be for immediate use, which we discussed as well, because immediate in Jewish thinking never really means immediate, right? But we saw what that means. In any event, one question which comes up, one question which comes up a lot is, what about when we are dealing with non-food items? We're discussing the malacha of borer, right? All the examples we've seen so far, somewhat deliberately, have dealt with food. And that was the case that the Gemara said. That was the case that Tosfot said. Tosfot said, Shnei minei ochalin. If you turn for a moment to page 24, you'll see the Taz at the bottom on page 4. Okay, before we get to the conclusion of the Taz, we'll see his Havamina. So page 24, source number 4. This is the Taz, the Turei Zahav, one of the classic commentators on the Shulchan Aruch in Orach Chaim and in other sections as well. He writes as follows. He says, B'perek klal gadol katvu Tosfot. Hayula fanav shnei minei ochalin galsinan. Right? Tosfot points out specifically, it does not say shnei minim. The Gemara does not say you have two types in front of you, but it says you have two types of food in front of you. Shnei minei ochalim. That is their language. V'nireh lichora tirtzonam lomar de'en shayach b'ra ela b'midei da'ochel. So you might think that Tosfot is coming here to emphasize that breira would only apply when I'm dealing with food. Aval b'shar dvarim kigon nivol kli mitoch kelim. If it comes to other things, like maybe with clothes, I know some questions came up here about sorting clothes. Okay, we'll get into that. That would not apply. All the examples we've had so far in the Gemara have dealt with food. Okay, stop there. We'll read the rest of the Taz but later on. But until this point, he says, right, all you see is it's dealing with specifically food. So we know a lot of the questions, certainly when it comes to borer, are dealing with food as well. Is there a concept of borer with non-food items? So if you go back to page 23, you'll see Rashi in source number 1, the Mishnah in Perek Klal Gadol in Masechet Shabbat that lists for us the 39 melachot. So we always remember the first 11 melachot are in the order. It's the easy way to remember. It's what's called Sidur Dapat. These are all the melachot that are involved in baking the bread, baking the lechem apanim in the Mishkan. And included in that list is borer, sorting, which is our melacha. But look at what Rashi says. He says, he says, Kulu kamay taveh b'samamanim shel tzeva tchelet v'argaman v'tolat sheni. He says, all of these melachot were involved, not just in the baking of the bread, but they were involved in the production of the dyes for the different materials at the walls of the Mishkan. And we needed different colors, the tchelet and the argaman and tolat sheni, etc. So they would bake the dyes, so to speak. So all the melachot from sewing, from zorea until ofer, which includes borer, would apply to that. Now that is clearly a case of non-food. Okay, so that seems to indicate that there is a concept of borer when it comes to items which are not food. Turn over the page. See number 2, the Gemara itself says, Amar Rava, Haimad Avid Chavita, Chayav Mishum Sheva Chataot. So the Gemara gives us example, a number of places where the Gemara says you would perform a certain action, you'd be chayav for a number of different melachot, you would transgress along the way. So here Rava is talking about somebody who makes a barrel, crafts an earthenware barrel on Shabbat. Okay, he would end up having to bring 7 chatot. In other words, there would be 7 melachot that he would transgress. What are those 7 melachot? So we won't go through all of them, but Rashi says, right here in source number 3, says Shevach adot tochen al gavim v'shochan adek havei tochen ubolel hatzorot agasot mitochan. You're taking the clumps of earth and you're taking the stones. You're removing the stones from the clumps of earth in order to make this barrel. Again, clearly, this is not food. It's not ochel. You're talking about stones and whatever it is, and therefore we have an indication from Rashi in a number of places that borer could apply to something that is not food. So let's see the rest of the Taz. We saw the introduction of the Taz, where he brings that according to Tosfot, it seems it only applies to food. At the top now of page 25, he says, That's the Gemara we just saw. But other Rishonim could count them differently and not include borer. But nonetheless, Rashi says it explicitly. And therefore, דיינו בורר הצורות הגזות מתוכן, ואם כן, צריך לומר, כתבו התוספות, מיני אוכלין גלסינן לרבותה, תאפילו באוכל מתוך אוכל, אמרינן דנשאר פסולת. Right? So says the Taz, why was it that Tosfot said specifically, Tosfot emphasizes that the gifts say shnei minei ochalin. What is Tosfot coming to teach you? Says the Taz, Tosfot is coming to teach you what we learned last week, right? Which is that if I have 2 types of food, nonetheless, I consider one of the types of food to be psolet. I consider that to be waste, and therefore, Brera would apply. But not to tell you that if it's not food, Boreu doesn't apply. And therefore, says the Taz, now it's interesting, I'm not aware if there's any of the poskim who say this explicitly before the Taz. Okay, and we'll see. There are contemporary poskim who say, what are you talking about? Boreu with non-food items. Until the Taz, nobody said that. Right? But the Taz says it. And since the Taz, the mainstream opinion seems to be, the general consensus is that borer, the malacha of sorting, applies also to items that are not food. Now, what does that mean? We have to define. Sorting means if you have a mixture. How do we define a mixture? We'll get to that. Okay, but that's the principle. So the Mishnah Brura in source number 5, he agrees. He says, when I have 2 types of items, right? And I want one, I don't want the other. Pegon kelim of gadim, vessels, clothes. We spoke about the example of cutlery, for example. Clothes, shayach brera. Okay, the concept of brera could apply. Okay, tzarech livor ze amin she'yotze litol achshav v'shal yish'alu al mokomam v'lo lipuch. Okay, as we've said all along, the concept of ochel mitoch psolet. Anytime when I'm taking that which I want, that's not considered borer. That's considered taking that which I want. That's not considered sorting. But we'll see how this applies. Now the Aruch HaShulchan, he has a long piece on this. In fact, he gives 2 explanations, and he says we essentially have a problem, because the minute that we say that borer that applies to things that are not food, we're basically not going to be able to do anything on Shabbos. But the minute you pick something up in your hand, you've got cups, you've got plates, you've got a cutlery, you've got books, you've got paper, whatever it is that everything's going to be borer. What are we going to, on Shabbat, lo matzani yodeinu b'ragleinu. So he says like this. He says, it's in source number 6. So first he says, first of all, you should know that borer does not apply only to types of food. Okay? Says we have a very, very big question. Says, how are we going to be able to manage on Shabbat? ואנו צריכים כעת לסכינים ובוררים הסכינים מביניהם או הכפות המזלגות. He says you have in front of you have all your cutlery. In the days of the Aruch HaShulchan was before Akias. They didn't have nice things, set aside in the drawers. You got the forks here and the spoons here, whatever. But if everything's all mixed up and it's in the drying rack, I don't know, you want to take your forks, you want to take your knives, you want to take your spoons. He says we can't do it. It's borer. What are we going to do? You hang your clothes on the wall. Nowadays we have an amazing thing called the cupboard, but I guess once upon a time they didn't have that. So he says you have all your clothes, hang up or whatever. I think we spoke about the socks last time, right? How are you going to get your socks on Shabbat? Says you take all your clothes off, you go through, you take what you need, and then you put it all back. That's a borer. Okay, so that's the problem. Over the page, he says, what if you have lots of books? You don't have a nice Again, before IKEA, you don't have a nice fancy bookcase, right? You've got all your books in a pile somewhere on the table. Maybe even after IKEA, you have your books in a pile on the table, okay? And I'll add, what about, we said papers, newspapers. Of course, we don't read newspapers on Shabbat, right? But you have the Adonai Shabbat. You walk into shul, you might have seen when you walked in here, you have all these pamphlets on the side and all these dapim. If they're all stashed together in a pile, okay, and people want to take one but not the other, it's a question of borah. Listen to this. He says there are these rich people, and they have on their table they have all different types of bowls and serving dishes. For every food, they want to take a different type of bowl. All these things. Okay, he says the same phrase. He says it the second time. He says if all of this is going to be borer, so we're not going to be able to function on Shabbos. What are we going to do? So the Aruch HaShulchan gives two explanations, meaning it's interesting. He doesn't outright reject the principle that borer applies to non-food stuffs, which you could conceivably have said, but he gives two principles whereby it may not apply, in which cases. So he says like this. Tshuvat davar zeh mishnei panim. I'll give you two explanations. The first, האחד, דבדבר ניכר הרבה לעין הרואה, לא שייך לומר בזה ברירה, שאין זה ברירה, אלא נטילה בעלמא. Okay. The first thing is, we said when we're talking about borer, we're talking about sorting. You have a mixture. You have a tarov, you have things that are mixed up, and I need to sort to get one. He says, where I have essentially, he doesn't use this language out. Essentially, he's saying if I don't have a mixture, if I have things which are easily recognizable, right? I open up the cupboard and I come to the coat rack and all the coats are hanging there. And I can see the coat that I want, and I just take it out. That's not called sorting. That's called taking. I'm just taking the coat. I'm just taking the book. If I have all the books right in the bookshelf, and I just come to the bookshelf and I take out, I can see on the spine which book is which, and I take the one that I want. I haven't sorted the books. I've taken the book that I wanted. Okay. Huh?
The cases when you have piles of books and you're looking for a specific book.
Okay. So the first question would have been about the bookcase. So you're right. So this answer that he's given would apply to the bookcase, but it won't apply to the pile of books. So he says. So therefore he says, וכל אלו הדברים שחשבנו הם נראים לעין כמו בבגדים וכלים וספרים כמובן. Things that are easily recognizable and easily clear. I don't have to exert any effort to go and choose the one that I want. That would be okay, he says. He says, so you'll tell me, well, anytime I can see what I want, so you'll say the same thing when it comes to food. I have a plate of food in front of me. I have the figs and the dates. I can see which are figs. I can see which are dates. I can take what I want. So he says there, no. He says there, no. There it's different. Okay, and this is going to be one of the questions throughout Hilchot Borer. We'll see how the poskim deal with this, because as you can already hear, it's not so clear when we'll say it's a mixture and when we'll say it's easily recognizable. Here are the two words he uses. He says mitoch katnutan v'ribuyan. It's to deal with the size, and it's to do with the quantity. How many of them are? If I have a bowl in front of me with lots and lots and lots of nuts and raisins or whatever it is, so they're all very, very small. So in order to take one specifically from the other, it's dependent on that would be considered sorting. Also, maybe if I'm talking about different fruits or whatever, but they're larger, but I have a bowl that's got many, many, many of them. So again, there's a certain effort that needs to be exerted to sort one from the other. He says that would not apply. He says, Masha'en ken bibgadim v'kelim usfalim. Okay, so it could be that what the Aruch HaShulchan is suggesting is that these kind of objects, it might apply to the pile of books. That you would say, even though we're dealing with a larger object, it's not really sorting one from the other. That may be different. Okay, that is the first explanation that he gives, and he now gives a second explanation, and we'll see there may be some ramifications between them. The second explanation is as follows. He says, Sheni, we're now in source number 7. We've already learned, he says he's going to write it later, but we've already learned it, that when I take, even when it comes to food, when I take ochel mitoch psolim, when I remove the substance which I want to eat right now, I'm allowed to take that. That's not called sorting. So in the same way, he says, anything that I want now, when I'm dealing with food, I'm talking about I'm talking about what I want to eat. If it's not food, I'm not going to eat it, hopefully. So therefore, when I take it, it's something that's what I want to use. Instead of saying but it's what I'm using. It's not derech achila, but it's derech shimush, or whatever you would call it. That would be allowed. And therefore, habgadim. I'm taking out the coats or the clothes that I want to wear now, or I'm taking out the utensils that I want to use right now, or the books that I want to learn from right now. That is equivalent to eating. He says, if you separated them just to sort them and just to put them away in their place in the right order, well, that's going to be a problem. According to this reason, right, that's going to be the nafkamina between the two reasons. If I say, again, his first explanation was, when I'm dealing with essentially larger objects, books, clothes, whatever, I wouldn't say this breira, because I'm not really sorting. It's not like when I have different pieces of fruit or different pieces of food that are very, very small, and I have to sort one from the other. I just have to pick it up. I just take it, right? When I pick up a bowl, I pick up a cup from the table. I don't think, I'm not sorting the cup from the table. I'm just picking it up. So that's the first explanation. The second explanation is no. These things would still be considered sorting, would still be considered a mixture. But if I'm taking now the object that I want to use currently, that's considered like derech achila, just like I could take the food from the mixture that I want to eat now. And therefore, the nafkamina between the two reasons would be, if I want to pick up the books in order to put them away, or when I would pick up the clothes to put them away, according to the first reason, the first explanation, that would be fine. According to the second explanation, that would not be. Yeah.
Taking a book from file that you want, it's not a problem. The problem is putting some books on one side saying I don't want these, and having another problem, I do want these. So you're saying you can do that as long as you're using it immediately. Doing it by hand, like
no, so that's exactly that is. So if I'm taking some of the books to put aside that I don't want, that's exactly the definition of brera.
Right.
So according to the Aruch HaShulchan's second explanation, that would be forbidden. According to his first explanation, that says that these are just large objects, it's not actually considered brera, then it would be okay. But you can say, but that's not so. It's not so straightforward, and we probably are going to take the second explanation when it comes to practical halacha. So look at the Shemirat Shabbat, source number 8. He says, I want to take one book from others. If I can't see which book it is, in other words, in order to tell, I've got all these books in a pile, all the covers look the same, or I can't see the writing's faded or whatever, and I need to pick them out, and I'm picking up book by one, and I'm deciding, okay, this one I want, this one I don't want. Don't do it until you actually want to use the book. Okay, so if you want to take it out earlier, you should take it out now and learn from it a little bit, look at it, because that's like for immediate use. Okay, because we need all three conditions. But if it's very clear, you can see the name of the book, right? In other words, if you have them in the bookcase and I just take out the book, that's not considered sorting. Okay, by contrast, Rav Ovadia, source number 9, he actually brings the first explanation of the Aruch HaShulchan, and therefore he says, יש להקל בנידון דידן, להתיר לברור סכינים, כפות מזלגות, ולתנם במקום המתאים להם לצורך הסעודה שלאחר מכן. You want to take out your knives and your forks and your spoons and you want to just put them away. You don't want to use them now. You want to put them away. He says, הנח להם לישראל, he says that would be allowed. וכן מותר לשמש לברור ספרים של בית הכנסת, חומשים, סידורים וכיוצא בהם, לתנם כל ספר במקומו הראוי. I'll say, this is quite a far-reaching heter of Rav Ovadia. I think many other poskim would not agree with this. Many other poskim would say we need to be choshesh for the second understanding of the Aruch HaShulchan as well. Okay, the Tzitz Eliezer over here has an interesting question. Over the page, source number 10, at the top of page 28. Tzitz Eliezer was asked like this: Im mutar b'Shabbat lechapes ulotzim me'alon et hanavi shetzachim liktur. Well, you have the book of Nevi'im, the one that you want for the Haftarah. Hagam shezeh karuch b'atzachat utzat v'asarat yeter sfarim sifrei Nevi'im k'dei limtzua hanavi adarush v'im ein b'zeh sur bolel. He says you're taking out all the other Nevi'im that you aren't going to use to take the one that you do want to use. So he says this is not something that we need to be concerned about. He says essentially, again, here, like the Aruch HaShulchan said, he said it's these are separate scrolls or separate books, and we're not concerned over there. Right. So essentially, what we have at this point is, again, we asked the question. We said, does Borer apply to items that are not food, large items like books, clothes, etc.? We saw two explanations in the Aruch HaShulchan. We have Rav Ovadia Yosef and the Tzitz Eliezer on the one hand, who seem to accept the first explanation of the Aruch HaShulchan, which says essentially Borer does not apply to books, to clothes, to larger objects. Okay, I'm going to park it there. There is that as you can see, Rav Ovadia, Tzitz Eliezer are serious poskim. That is a shita that exists. However, and we will bring it into account if there are other mitigating factors, we can add that into the mix. However, the Shemrat Shabbat Kilchata, many other poskim say no, we need to be choshesh that there is a concept of breira by these things, and therefore, if I want to remove a book or an item of clothing, etc., I should do it in a way that it's the one that I want to use, and it's the one that I want to use now, and therefore, there would not be a problem. Okay, what about? There's a question that comes up about sorting cutlery, right? You've had lots of people for dinner on Friday night. You've washed up all the dishes. So washing up, etc. We'll get to later on the concerns that might be involved there. But now you have in your cutlery rack, whatever it is, you have the knives and the forks and the spoons, and everything's all mixed together. So seemingly, if I'm going to pick them up, I'm going to that's going sorting. So have a look at the Shmat Shabbat in source number 11. He says, "Sakum me'ulav asur l'mayno kedei lesader kol sug b'tam miyuchad lo." If I'm now going to say I'm going to take out the forks and put them away, and take the knives and specifically and pull those out, put them away, that's going to be a problem. וגם אחרי שטיפתם במים בקערה, אסור להוציא כל סוג בנפרד ולנגבו ולהניחו בתא שלו. To take out each type by itself and to put them away, that's going to be a problem. אבל מותר לקחת מתוך ערימת הסכו"ם המעורב מן הבא לידו, כלי אחר כלי ללא סדר, לנגבו ולהניחו בתוך תאו. In other words, he says here two things. He says what you can do is, first of all, if I'm taking them out one by one, meaning I'm not specifically now taking all the knives, I'm just putting my hand into the cutlery. I'm taking whatever comes out. First thing that comes out, that's fine. Why am I taking it out? I'm taking it out because I want to use it right now. How do I want to use it? Because I'm drying it. Okay, that's the example that he gives. If I'm drying it or I'm using it for something, so then I can take out whatever comes. I can dry it. Now that I've used it, now I'm finished drying it, I'm finished using it. Now I can put it away. I don't have to put it back and mix it up again. If I'm just taking it out to put it away, that's not so straightforward. Okay, even if I'm just taking the one that out. But his point is you can take whatever comes to your hand, right? Whichever one I take out, I want to use it now, I want to dry it, I want to do something with it, and then I can put it away. That's the way that we'll see a bit later on. We'll see another way to maybe sort this sort the utensils, etc. Another very, very important leniency that comes up is what's called essentially removing, we spoke about this last week, but essentially removing the outer layer. If I'm pushing something away, I'm not taking it out and sorting it, but it's blocking my access in order to get to something else, then we could do that. Have a look at the Mishnah Berurah in source number 12. He says, Efshar, אם תלויים כמה בגדים על הכותל, ומחפש אחר בגדו שרוצה עכשיו ללבשו. Right, I come to shul, and now on the coat rack, I see there's all sorts of coats, and only one of them is mine. Right, and there was somebody told us a story last week, I think, of somebody who would come to shul and they would wait till everybody else had gone so they could get their coats because they didn't want to be bora. Right? Is that a problem? So says the Mishnah Berurah like this. He says, there are a number of items that are hanging there. And I only want my coat. I don't want everybody else's coat. And I want to wear it now. How am I going to get to my coat? I have to move the other coats away in order to get to mine. That is not considered bora. Or if I have on my plate, I have a number of different foods, right? And the one that I want, and I know what I want, but it's underneath and there's others on top of it, I can move them away to get to what I want. So that is okay, right? If I have all the socks in the drawer and I know that the socks that I need is at the bottom, right? Because it always is, because if the one that I want is from the top, the other one's going to be on the bottom. So I can move all the other socks just to get to there. That is fine. That is not considered borer. That is not considered sorting. Another example similar to this is the Shema Shabbat Hilchot. Maybe we don't have this so much nowadays, but sometimes you go in some shuls where they have. Imagine you have a box with all the different index cards, right? It's got everybody is getting the aliyah or whatever. So you want to get to the one. So he says, "Mutar lechapes bekarteset." Searching through a card index. You know which one you want to just get the one you want now. And the fact that I'm moving the other cards in order to get to the one that I need, that is okay. So where this comes up as well, and where this can come up a lot, and it's very, very practical on Shabbat, is if you play card games or if you play board games, okay, with the kids or the grandkids, whatever. So you have different types of cards that you need, or you have different types of pieces that you need. So here we have to be aware that they're small, they're a mixture, they're sorting. This could fall into the category of borer. Have a look at source number 14, Pninei Halacha of Melamed. He says, Kashem sheyesh yisur borer b'minei ma'achalim. Just like we have a prohibition of borer when it comes to types of food, kach yesh yisur borer b'shar dvarim. So too with other things as well. Kmo sfarim, kelim, gadim, right? So we said books, utensils, clothes, etc. V'kol ha'klalim shnei borer b'machalim, chalim al shal sugei ha'ta'aruvot. Okay, that's just a chazara of basically the first half an hour of the shiur. Everything that applies on food applies on these other items as well. Lemashal. Yeladim she'bavu shnei sugim shel misrakei kubiyot. So if I have games with different dice and different pieces, and the kids mixed up the two games together. So sometimes imagine you have one of those chess and checkers. You have the set. So you have a bag with all the pieces. There's the chess pieces and the checkers pieces. You only want to play one of the games. All the pieces are mixed up. So he says like this. If it's just stam kacha because I want to put the chess pieces in one bag and I want to put the checkers pieces in another bag so that it will all be neat and tidy, that's going to be forbidden. That's borer. But if right now I want to play, so I take out the pieces that I want to use right now to play with, I'm going to play chess, that's okay. I'm not sorting it for the sake of sorting. But I am separating what I want to play with, right? Here, derech mischak, like we spoke about derech aliyah, derech achila before. Shebitchilat mischak lochim et hakubiyot hamiyuadot lo. At the beginning of the game, you take out the pieces that you want, right? And that's going to be the klal all the time. Whatever, if I want to play a certain card, if I've got the cards in my hand and I want to play a certain card, I can take out the card and I can play it. That's what I want. That's not considered sorting. But just sorting them so that the cards will be sorted in the pile, that is going to seemingly be more problematic. Again, according to those who say that there is no brera when it comes to things which are not food, so there is, I guess, what to rely on or what to be melamed zchut, but we generally don't accept that unless there are other mitigating factors. Another example where this could come up, okay, and this is very, very common. I'm going to use a prop over here. Everybody know what these are? Right, so you have in many shuls, like in our shul, you have these cards, these golden sort of tickets for the aliyot, which the gabbai goes around. So again, in the morning, the gabbai is holding them all and he wants to give to the kohen, right? And etc. So I'm taking out the card that I want, I'm giving it to the people, there's no problem, that's fine. Where does it become an issue? So everybody gives them back. Well, let's say that Rabbi comes up and he forgot his card, so the gabbai puts them back, and then only afterwards Rabbi comes and remembers, and now it's in the wrong order. He wants to put them in the order. not so simple and not so straightforward to say. If I'm now going and sorting them, it may be also a problem here we have of hachana for after Shabbos, if that's the purpose. But in order to sort it, that would seemingly be exactly the case of Boreh, what we're talking about. How could you sort these nonetheless? Let's say they were all in the wrong order. So what you could do, we'll see this a little bit later on, but if a person was to empty the whole thing out and just scatter them onto the bimah, will make a big noise. So do it after shul's over, when everybody's gone home. But you scatter them all out and then just take them one at a time in the order that you want. That would be okay. We'll see the sources for that in a moment. Okay, but that's a practical application of Hilchot Boreh. So not just Tzurba Rabbanan, also Shalom. Okay. In any event, so let's talk. We're now on page 31. Let's talk a little bit about the definition of a mixture. As we said, this is the question, and this is one of the most difficult questions in Hilchot Boreh. Actually, if you look at over the page, source number 17, the Piskei Teshuvot, which is a contemporary sefer, which collates a lot of different opinions. So he says, look at the second paragraph here, the first paragraph in bold. Be'emet ki me'akshayim achin nichbadim b'dinei boreh. One of the most difficult questions when it comes to this melacha of boreh, hu hageder hameduyak lematzav shel ta'arofet. How do we define a mixture? As we've already seen in the different examples, it's not so clear. לא נתבהר היטב בפוסקים, בעצם אין הדבר נקבע, אלא בראיית העין ובדעת בני אדם. Meaning, when do I say that something is considered a mixture and something is not considered a mixture? Basically, what people think and what people see. So it's very hard to determine. לפי מה שנראה הוא מתקבל בהרגשה אם נקרא מעורב או לא. Right? Would you call it mixed or not? So there we נכן נעשה הדבר קשה בכפליים, כי נתת תורת כל אחד ואחד בידו. Obviously, we can't just allow every person to decide, but that's going to be the difficulty. So let's go back. We're jumping the gun. Let's go back to page 31. We have the Trumat Hadeshin. Trumat Hadeshin, as we mentioned, I think last week, that the Trumat Hadeshin is a Sefer Shutim, book of questions and answers, but very unique in that he wrote his own questions. So we know that, sometimes there's a kasha that comes up, there's a sheila, you think, well, he answered that question, but it's not... the Trumat Hadeshin made his own questions up and he wrote the answer, so he clearly wants to teach us something whenever he writes. So he says like this. He says, נראה דמאוד היה כנגד שפת הלב, דשני מינים שניכרים בהפרדתם, חתיכות גדולות, שמונחים יחד, די ברירה שייכה בהו. Okay, he says, you would think, when I have two large items that are placed next to each other, but I can clearly see which is which, to say that is sorting, to say that is a mixture, that seems a little bit strange. Okay, it would only be, like we said before, where I have sort of small items that are together, that are much harder to distinguish. Again, two larger items that are clearly distinguishable one from another. Why should that be boreh? Etc. Skipping a little bit. משמע דווקא כשמעורבים ואינם ניכרים, אבל בכי אגבנה, אף אגב אין כל מין ומין מסודר בפני עצמו. מכל מקום לא מקרה מעורב. He says, if you have, for example, types of fruit that are next to each other on a plate, they're not mixed together, that would seemingly not be considered boreh. אפס הוא לא כתב הסמג, דברו פסול מתוך האוכל, אפילו boreh לא תרחב חדת, אין לחלק ולעקר בלא ראיה ברורה. In other words, what the Trumat Hadeshin says is like this. He says, it would make sense to me from Svara that if I have two items which are clearly distinguishable one from another, they should not be fit into the category of boreh. However, there are Rishonim who seem to indicate that it is, and therefore, at the end of the day, he says, when can we say that something is not a mixture? He says, we need a raya brura. We need a clear proof. In other words, he says, don't take this too far. Don't be too lenient. We already saw that the Ramah, here in source number 16, and he was quoting the Trumat Hadeshin, he said, for example, Shnei minei dagim, mikre shnei minei ochalim. I have two types of fish, are considered two types of food. ואסור לבוא אחד מחברו אלא בידו, כדי לאכול מיד, אף על פי שהחתיכות גדולות, וכל אחד נקראת בפני עצמה. Even though they're large pieces and they're recognizable one from another, I have the two types of herring on the plate. I've got the herring and the matias or whatever it is. I can see they're large, somewhat large pieces. Nonetheless, we call that a mixture. So therefore, what we can see from here is that it's not always so clear. There's some cases that are very clear that is a mixture, and there's some cases that are very clear that is not a mixture, and there's some cases that are very much in the middle. So let's go back to Piskei Teshuvot. Let's see some of the examples that he gives. Okay, so we saw the paragraph. We saw how he said this is a difficult subject. Third paragraph in source number 17, page 32. He says, okay, these are the parameters. How big are the items? Obviously, the smaller it is, the less distinguishable it will be. Second of all, how much there is, the more of the two items there are, the more difficult it will be to distinguish them. For example, again, if I have fruits, if I have a plate, if I have one apple and one orange, very, very clearly, there's an apple and an orange, it's not a mixture. But if I have 10 apples and 10 oranges, and they're all, even though they're the same size, okay, it becomes a little bit more difficult. The ad kama hem shonim mizeh, and how different, the more similar the things are, the more difficult it might be. So he says, dugma achat, tapuach or tapuz zeh liad zeh b'kal einot talib. You have an apple and an orange, right? What are you mixing apples and oranges for, right? That's not a mixture. That's mistaber shekmochen shnei tapuchim v'shnei tapuzim. And if I have two apples and I have two oranges, I can very, very easily tell there's two apples and two oranges. Okay. But again, now if I have 10 apples, at what point does it become? It's a few apples, a few oranges. At what point? But the point is, you can see if you have a bowl and I have 10 apples and 10 oranges together, it's a mixture. Whereas if I have one and one, maybe not. Okay, maybe more than 10, whatever. So then he says, Divrei Trumot Hadesh Nizkarim Emanel La'aglenu, she'af al pi she'efshar she'en shech b'la klal, af al pi chen ein lemahel la'akel. We shouldn't be too quick to dismiss it in these cases to say that it's not a mixture. V'zeh barur me'al kol safek, כי כל שיש איזה תלכה, אפילו קלה של חיפוש בתוך התערובת, למצוא את המבוקש, או קושי מסוים לשלוף הדבר, ודאי יש פה דין בורר. Okay, he says a good rule of thumb. If there is a certain effort in extrapolating one from the other, then it's more likely to be a mixture. So we go back to the books, for example. If I'm standing in front of the bookcase, right, and I can see exactly which book I want, I don't think there's anybody who would say that pulling the book out of the bookcase would be borer. But that's clear. But if I have a pile of books and it's not a particularly neat pile of books, and I have to really scrounge around and look and find the one that I want, or let's take the example of the papers, right? The Adonai Shabbat. So if you come on Friday morning, right, when they're all very, very clearly in separate piles, you want the Olam Katan, you want the Torah tidbits, you want the this, you want the that, whatever, then there's no question. You just take the one I want. So if I come early, maybe on Friday evening, when I walk into shul, maybe after mincha still, I don't know. I haven't checked at what point do the Adonai Shabbat get all mixed up. But at the beginning, they're all in separate piles. Very clearly, that's not a case of borer. But you come on Shabbos morning, you come now, have a look on your way out. You'll see you've got all the papers one on top of the other. I want to get one. Now it's a mixture. That would be borer, right? Say I've got clothes in the cupboard. If all my clothes are very neatly stacked or hung up or piled one on top of the other, so then it's not going to be, right? If I have a shirt, if I have a pile of shirts in the cupboard, or whatever it is, and I need to, again, I know that I want the one on the bottom, as we said before. So I need to remove the other shirts that are on top in order to get the one that I want. That's not going to be boring. But if now I'm opening up the sock drawer and all the socks are jumbled up together in a mixture, and really you need to, okay, that may be more of a problem. So that's essentially the rule of thumb over here. The Hilchot Shabbat, which is another one of the contemporary Sfarim on Hilchot Shabbat, he gives a case, which again, you'll hear this and immediately you'll recognize this is not a mixture. He says, if I have the fridge, I open up the fridge and I've got different pots and different containers and different foods next to each other. That's not a mixture, right? I'm opening up the fridge, I'm taking the food that I want, I'm taking the pot that I want, and that's it. But he says, however, if I have lots of things which are similar and they're all mixed together, if I have all different yogurts, for example, which all look the same, but one's a strawberry flavor, one's 3%, one's 0%, or whatever, and I have to pick them up, then there could be a question of sorting in that way. Now, one other point which we said, if I want to really sort things out into what we've said so far, is that we said by cutlery, we said by the different examples, if I want to pick up the item that I need to use now, or I want to pick them up one by one in order to use whatever comes into my hand, that's okay. Is there a way that if I'm going to select them, I'm going to say I want to take the forks and the knives, etc., to put away in the drawer? Not so simple. Is there a way that I can sort it nonetheless? So the Gemara in Shabbat, source number 19, and this is relevant to the simanim, that is what I mentioned before, about the different tickets, right, for the aliyot. So it says here, Ki atar avdim yama, Shavta Rav Bivi Havai, Ve'iklu Ravi Ami Rabbi Asi. Okay, so he says we were for Shabbat by Rav Bivi, and Rav Ami and Rabbi Asi came. So what did Rav Bivi do? Shada Kamayu Kalkala de Pile. It says he placed, so the translation here is better, he says he placed before them, but Shadai Kamayu normally means sort of he threw it. He had a basket of fruit and he threw it down in front of them. In other words, he emptied it out. So there was fruits and leaves and all sorts of different things inside the basket, but he emptied it all out, so it was all there. And the Gemara says, Lo yadana im mishum dasava ochel mitoch psolet asur, im mishum ayin yafahu de mechaven. Gemara says, we're not sure if he did it because of halacha, related to the halacha of borer, or he just wanted everything to be there in front of them to show how much fruit he had. But essentially, Rashi says, Shada Kamayu, because he had this basket with fruit and leaves and stems and all sorts of things. He did it so that there would be no problem of borer. He didn't want to separate the food from the leaves, etc. Because then he'd be giving to each one, and again, he'd be doing it in a way that he's not doing it to eat now, he's doing it just to give them. He just placed it all out on the floor in front of them, and each one comes along and takes whatever he wants, and it's all separated by itself. So based on that, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and Rav Moshe write the following, source 21, it says, so now I've got all the knives and the forks that are sitting in the drying rack. Could I just spill that out onto the table, and then I can take the ones that I want? And Rav Moshe says, yeah, it's a tova. That's a good idea. Okay, so that's why. So the same thing I said over there. You could throw that all out onto the bima. Again, be careful, don't make a noise and frighten people. But and then you can take one by one the ones that you want. Okay, one more topic that we'll talk about today. We mentioned this last time as well, I think. But this is the question of removing a solid item from a liquid. Okay, the classic case that's brought in the poskim, very appetizing case. If you have a fly in your soup or in your water or whatever it is, are you allowed to remove it? Again, you're removing the psolet from the ochel, which is backwards from the usual procedure. So we have the Maharit Sahalon, also known as the Maharitats, over here in source number 22, and he says something which sounds very logical, but then when we talk about sorting, we're talking about the usual way. So how do you sort things? So when I have solids, that's essentially that's one way of sorting that we've been talking about until now. When you have liquids, the Gemara has a whole discussion, and we'll get to this later. I know somebody asked a question about it previously. It's not in our topic for today, but it's later on. I think next week we'll probably get there. In terms of filtering water or wine, or there's a whole sugya in the Gemara about that. But the way of separating liquids is you filter it. You filter one liquid from the other. If I have a liquid and I have a solid piece floating on top, again, you could argue, if I pick up the solid piece from the liquid, I'm not sorting, they were never really mixed together. The fact is that I can just pick it up and it's gone. So that's what the Maharit Salon says. He says, if a wasp was in a liquid, you could remove it because this is not filtering. So the concept of sorting, as we've been discussing until now, applies to solid items, does not apply to liquid items. The same way that you cannot filter a solid, you cannot sort a liquid, so to speak. That's not called sorting. You're just taking it out. Now the Chemdat Yamim, which is a compilation of customs and laws published in about the 18th century, here in source number 23, he adds another reason. He says, if the fly or the mosquito falls into the wine or the water, he says there is no sorting over here. He quotes the Maharit Salon and said, but he says the odd over the page, again, as we've said until now, sorting means there's a certain amount of effort that's required. You have to search inside, you have to sort it out. But something that's already floating on top, it's already separated. If I just pick it up, I'm not separating it. It's already separated. It's floating on top. Okay, and that's what may be the difference between the Maharit Salon and the Chemdat Yamim is if I'm talking about an object that's quite small. Okay, because even if it's floating on top, right, you'll know that if you've ever had, for example, if you ever cracked open, I'm sure this has never happened to anybody here, but if you've ever cracked open an egg, and a small, tiny piece of the shell, right, falls into the egg, you know how difficult it is to get it out. Most of the time, just throw the whole thing away and crack a new egg, right? And then it happens again. But if it's very, very small, so it's hard to extract it. If it's something very large, so that's floating on top, you can just pick it up, and it's much easier. So that might be the nafkamina between them. But anyway, we don't seem to accept the Maharit Sahalon. We do think that there may be a problem here of Borer. But the Taz in source number 24 brings another possibility. He says, right, according to the Ravid and others, there would be a problem of Borer, and therefore, that is considered sorting. You're removing the waste, and that would be forbidden. But if I take some of the juice together with it, then that would be allowed. Okay, the Chazon Ish over here is lenient even on that, but generally the Mishnah Berurah accepts that, and that is the general principle. And this would apply. We would apply this principle as well when it comes to solids. So if I have, for example, sometimes we'll talk about peeling fruit next time, but sometimes if I'm separating a part of the fruit or part of something, and there's a part that's not so good that I want, if I'm just separating the waste, that would be problematic. But if I remove a little bit of the fruit as well, so then I'm separating also from the ochel, and that would be permitted. Okay, so that's generally the accepted psak in the Mishnah Berurah and others. The Rav Ovadia does accept the leniency of the Maharit Salon, but he writes at the end, Tov lachmir k'svar shniya, but I'll say lakel k'svar shuna yesh lo alma sheyismo. But that all of this is where we have a small item that's in a liquid. What if I have something which is very, very large, and again, there's no effort in terms of taking it out, like the Chemdat Yamim said, then there are many others who would accept that. So Shvitat Shabbat, for example, source number 26, he says, Im naflu zvuvim lakos, lo yotzi zvuvim lavado, שהרי זה כבורר פסולת מאוכל, שאסור, אפילו כדי לאכול מיד, ורק ייקח גם מהמשקה קצת עמהם. You should take some of the liquid together with them. And then he says here in the second paragraph, דווקא זבובים וכיוצא בזה, פעמים שהם משתקעים ומתבלבלים, that doesn't mean the fly gets confused. The fly is already dead. It's not getting confused about anything. But it means that it gets mixed up together. But if I have something large, I have meat in sauce, or I have pickled vegetables, something like that. Nobody says over there that that's a problem of brera. So, for example, the Hilchot Shabbat says, right? I have pickled cucumbers. You could say, well, I'm taking the solid object out of the liquid. No, it's something that's large, and it's that's not considered tarovet at all. Okay, the Hilchot Shabbat here over the page as well says that if you we spoke previously about making tea, and in terms of kli shlishi and all those discussions, but in terms of removing the tea bag from the cup, again, that in itself is not considered. That is not considered borer in terms of removing the tea bag. Again, it's something that's large and it's distinct, and I don't consider it to be sorting one from the other. Okay, I think we'll stop there for today. Okay, the next section, there's more to talk about, as I mentioned, in terms of peeling, detaching parts of food. What about using a peeler for vegetables? There's also a discussion later on about washing vegetables, right? Washing fruit and vegetables when I have dirt on it, if I was to soak the fruit, for example, to remove the dirt, that's a question. And also a whole section about filtering water, etc. So all that we will do next week, B'ezrat Hashem. Wonderful day, everybody, and a good week.
Thank you very much. Thank you.